A billionaire walked into a high-end steakhouse dressed like a drifter. He ordered the most expensive steak on the menu just to see if anyone still had integrity when money wasn't watching. The elite diners sneered, whispered, judged him instantly. What he didn't know: someone in the kitchen had tampered with his meal, something that would make him violently ill. But right before he took his first bite, a waitress in a faded green uniform quietly slipped a folded note under his hand. He opened it and froze, not because of what they'd done to his food, but because in a room full of wealth, the only person with real class was the one nobody even saw. That note made him set down his fork and decide to destroy everything. But what did it say? The beanie Caleb Rowan pulled over his ears was falling apart at the edges. Looked ridiculous next to the penthouse he was standing in. The heavy coat he buttoned up reeked of rain, and God knows what else. He kept these clothes in a trunk shoved to the back of his closet, hidden behind rows of suits that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Tonight was the first time since he'd become CEO that he was actually going to see how the other half lived. His chief of staff, Marcus, stood near the bathroom counter, checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. He'd been managing Caleb's rise to the top for 6 months now, and he hated every wild idea his boss came up with. "You don't have to do this," Marcus said. "We've got auditors, regional managers. You're the CEO of Rowan Hospitality, not some undercover cop." Caleb caught his eye in the mirror while rubbing grease under his nails to sell the look. "Auditors only see what people let them see. I need to know where the problems really are." The alley behind Rowan Hospitality headquarters smelled like wet cardboard, old grease, and whatever that metallic smell is that comes with city rain. Not the kind of air that usually made it into a custom Maybach. But tonight the back door was wide open. Caleb Rowan sat on the edge of the leather seat, his expensive shoes hanging just above a puddle. He breathed in deep, let the stink settle in his lungs for a second, then let it out slow. Time to shed the armor. "You sure about this, sir?" Marcus, his head of security, was watching him from the front seat with that look he always got when Caleb did something stupid. "We could just hire a mystery shopper. A consultant. We've got people for this." "Consultants check boxes, Marcus," Caleb said quietly. He unclasped the Patek Philippe from his wrist, worth more than most people's houses, and tossed it onto the passenger seat. It landed with a dull thud. "They look for health code violations and wait times. I'm looking for something else. I'm looking for the rot underneath." He got out and stood in the cold drizzle. Instead of his usual tailored suit, he pulled on a jacket he'd bought from a donation bin a few towns over. Oversized. Wool. The color of old plums. Frayed hem. Missing a button. It felt rough and wrong against his skin. Nothing like the Egyptian cotton he'd worn his whole life. He pulled a stick of charcoal from the coat pocket and dragged it along his jaw and forehead. Then he smudged it with his thumb until it looked like days of built-up dirt. "The obsidian is the crown jewel of my father's legacy," Caleb said, glancing at his reflection in the tinted window. The guy staring back wasn't a CEO. He was nobody. A drifter. Someone people looked through instead of at. But the quarterly numbers don't add up with what I'm hearing. High profits, but the locals hate us. Discrimination lawsuits settled quietly. Staff quitting left and right. He tugged a gray beanie down over his ears, hiding his clean haircut. Hunched his shoulders the way he'd seen people do on the drive over. That protective curl you get when you're used to being cold. "If Julian Vance is running that place the way I think he is," Caleb said, "I need to see it from the ground. I need to know how they treat someone who can't do a damn thing for them." Marcus sighed and held out a small earpiece. "Security's stationed around the block. If they lay a hand on you. If they touch me, you wait." Caleb cut him off. He didn't take the earpiece. He didn't want a safety net. The fear had to be real. "If I signal, you come. Not before. I want to see how far they'll go." He turned away from the car and shoved his hands deep into the coat pockets. His fingers brushed a thick roll of hundreds held together with a rubber band. His only weapon tonight. "Take the car around the block," he said, his voice changing, getting rougher. "I've got a reservation." He stepped out of the alley and onto the sidewalk. The shift was instant. Under the streetlights, people moved to avoid him. A couple in fancy clothes crossed the street just to keep their distance. Caleb felt the invisible wall go up between him and everyone else. For 30 years, doors had opened for him. Tonight, he'd have to force his way in. He looked up the street. 2 blocks away, the neon sign for the obsidian glowed bright. promising warmth, wagyu, and whiskey to anyone wearing the right shoes. Caleb pulled his head down against the wind and started walking toward the light. The test had begun. The entrance to the obsidian was built to make you feel small. Black marble, polished brass, velvet ropes, and a guy at the door who looked more like a bouncer than a host. Warm amber light poured out from the windows, promising comfort and excess, but the second Caleb stepped into that light, everything went cold. He shuffled forward the way he'd practiced, favoring his left leg a little, head tucked into his coat collar. Not the confident walk of a CEO. More like a guy just trying to get out of the rain. The security guard didn't even unfold his arms. Just shifted his weight and blocked the door like a human barricade. "Wrong turn, pal," the guy said flatly. "Shelter's 3 miles south. Keep moving." Caleb stopped and looked up, letting the guard see the dirt smeared on his face and the emptiness in his eyes. "Sign says you're open," he said, voice rough. "I've got money." "You've got a smell," the guard shot back, stepping closer like he was herding cattle. "And you're freaking out the customers. Get lost before I make you." Caleb felt a flash of real anger. Not for himself, but for everyone who'd ever stood here and been treated like garbage. He saw the guard's hand coming toward his shoulder. In his old life, one phone call, and this guy would have been gone. Tonight, Caleb just stepped past him. It was quick. A shift of weight. One assertive step forward that caught the guard off balance. Caleb didn't shove. He just moved into the space the guy left open a second too late. Before the guard could grab him, Caleb pushed through the brass doors. Everything changed. The noise of the city, sirens, wind, traffic, cut off like someone hit mute. Inside it was all soft murmurs and the smell of truffle oil, old wood, and money. Then silence. It spread out from the entrance like a ripple. The hostess stand went quiet. Then the bar. Then the whole dining room. Silverware stopped clinking. Laughter died mid-sentence. Caleb stood in the doorway, mud from his boots soaking into the plush carpet. He could feel 100 pairs of eyes on him at once. Not curious. Hostile. Judging. He started walking. He walked right past the hostess, who stood frozen with her mouth half open, clutching a menu like it might protect her. He headed straight for the middle of the room. To his left, for guys in pinstripe suits, probably worked for companies he owned, stopped talking. One leaned back in his chair, swirling his scotch, not even trying to be quiet. "Security must be napping," the guy said with a smirk. "Or maybe this is dinner theater. Dining with the homeless. Real cutting-edge stuff." The table erupted in laughter. Sharp. Mean. Caleb kept his head down, but he saw everything. A woman in a cocktail dress pulled back as he walked by, clutching her purse to her chest like he was going to snatch it. Sneers everywhere. Curled lips. Pure disgust that he'd dared to ruin their night. Then came the camera flash. Some kid to his right held up his phone, pointing it right at Caleb's face. "Smile for the story," the kid said to his date, grinning. Caption: "When you lose your crypto wallet." The cruelty was so casual it burned. Caleb wanted to pull the roll of cash from his pocket right then and there. Wanted to see the color drain from their faces when they realized who he was. But he held back. He had to see this through. Had to know if there was a single decent person left in the place his father had built. He spotted an empty table near the center. Prime real estate, usually reserved for VIPs. The hostess was still standing by the door in shock, so Caleb just walked over and sat down. He pulled out the velvet chair. It scraped loud across the floor, the only sound in the dead silent room. He sank into the cushion, a dirty smudge on a clean canvas, and set his grimy hands flat on the white tablecloth. Then he waited for hell to break loose. The air inside the obsidian was thick with mahogany, truffle oil, and old money. The kind of place where the lighting was just dim enough to hide your sins, but bright enough to show off your jewelry. When Caleb walked past the frozen hostess and into the main room, the chatter didn't just fade, it stopped dead. He could feel every eye in the place on his back, boring holes through his frayed jacket. He scratched at the grease smudge on his cheek, and a woman in a pearl necklace near the entrance actually recoiled, gripping her wine glass like his poverty might be catching. Caleb didn't move, just stood there, waiting. Didn't have to wait long. Julian Vance came striding out of the dining room like he owned the place. The manager moved with that kind of smooth arrogance you only get when you think you're the one deciding who matters and who doesn't. Navy suit tailored just a little too tight. Hair slicked back with enough gel to survive a tornado. He didn't look at Caleb's face, just stared at his boots. "Excuse me," Julian said, voice smooth as ice. He stopped a few feet away, keeping his distance. "Loading docks around back. If you're looking for the shelter, it's 3 blocks east. Don't make me call security." Caleb looked him dead in the eye. Julian's stare was cold. Empty. Looking for any sign of weakness. "I'm not delivering anything," Caleb said, voice rough but steady. "And I'm not lost. I'm here for dinner." A few people at nearby tables laughed under their breath. Julian gave him a thin smile that didn't touch his eyes. He stepped closer, dropping his voice to a hiss. "Look around," Julian whispered, waving vaguely at the velvet booths and crystal glasses. "This is a place with standards. A bottle of water here costs more than everything you're wearing. You're disturbing my guests. Leave. Now." "I've got money," Caleb said. "Panhandling change doesn't count," Julian sneered, reaching for the radio on his belt. "You've got 5 seconds before I have you thrown out on your ass." Caleb didn't flinch. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket. Julian tensed, maybe expecting a knife or something worse. But what Caleb pulled out was more dangerous than that. A roll of cash the size of a soda can. Thick, messy, wrapped in a rubber band. All hundreds. Caleb didn't hand it over. Just dropped it onto the host's stand. Thud. The sound was heavy. Final. The laughter died instantly. Julian's hand froze halfway to his radio. His eyes shot from Caleb's dirty beanie to the brick of cash, pupils going wide. You could almost see him doing the math. 5 grand, maybe more. The silence was suffocating. Caleb rested his hand on top of the money and tapped his finger against Benjamin Franklin's face. "Legal tender still part of the dress code?" Caleb asked. Julian swallowed hard. The sneer melted off his face, replaced by something worse, greed wrapped in fake politeness. He cleared his throat and straightened his tie. "I suppose we can make exceptions for paying customers," Julian said, voice tight. He snatched a menu off the stand, movements suddenly jerky. "Follow me." He led Caleb right through the middle of the restaurant, parading him past the staring diners like he was some kind of circus act. Sat him at a table dead center in the room where everyone could see. Julian slapped the leather menu down hard. "Kitchen's busy," he said, still dripping condescension. "Order now." Caleb didn't even look at the menu, just looked straight up at him. "The tomahawk," he said. "Medium rare. Whatever it costs." Julian raised an eyebrow. The tomahawk was the signature dish. $300 for a slab of beef meant for millionaires and CEOs. "That's a serious investment," Julian said, eyeing the cash again. "You sure you have the taste for it?" "Just bring the meat," Caleb said, looking away. "And keep the change from the first bill." Julian peeled 100 off the top of the roll and pocketed it smooth as silk. He smirked, looking down at the billionaire dressed like a bum. "Very well," Julian said, turning on his heel. "I'll have the chef prepare something special just for you." The heavy doors swung shut behind Julian, cutting him off from the quiet elegance of the dining room. The kitchen was a different animal. Chaos and stainless steel, harsh fluorescent lights, and the angry sizzle of fat hitting a hot pan. The air didn't smell like perfume and money here. It smelled like sweat, gas, and whatever sauce was reducing on the stove. Julian stormed toward the pass, his fake smile gone, replaced by the sneer of a man who thought he ran the place. He slammed the ticket down on the metal counter hard enough to make the line cooks flinch. "Listen up," Julian shouted over the clatter of pans. "We've got a special order. The bum sitting in the middle of the dining room thinks he can buy his way in with a wad of dirty cash." Marco, the head chef, wiped his hands on a greasy towel. Big guy, red face, eyes that used to care about cooking but had long since given up. He leaned over and squinted at the ticket. "The tomahawk," Marco said, laughing. "For the guy who looks like he crawled out of a dumpster? You want me to waste a prime cut on him?" "He paid," Julian said, leaning in close, voice low. "But we don't serve trash like that here. If he wants to eat like a king, he needs to learn he's nothing but a joke." Julian looked around the kitchen, making sure everyone was watching. The sous chefs and line cooks froze, knives hovering over their boards, waiting. "The dog wants a bone," Julian said, eyes gleaming. "Make it memorable. Make sure he knows exactly what he is." Marco got it immediately. He grinned, showing a gold tooth. Walked over to the walk-in and came back with a beautiful tomahawk ribeye. Long bones sticking out like a handle, perfect marbling. The kind of steak that deserved respect. Marco held it up for Julian to see. Then he opened his hand. Slap. The steak hit the floor with a wet, heavy thud. Landed right near the drain where the rubber mats ended and the greasy tile began. The kitchen went dead silent. One of the younger prep cooks looked away, uncomfortable, but nobody said a word. Julian ran this place, and everyone knew it. Oops, Marco said flatly. He used the toe of his boot to nudge the meat, sliding it through a puddle of dirty mop water and vegetable scraps. Let it sit there for a good 10 seconds, soaking up the filth. Perfect, Julian whispered, watching with twisted satisfaction. That's exactly what he deserves. Marco bent down and grabbed the steak by the bone. It was slick now, coated in kitchen grime. He didn't rinse it, didn't wipe it off. Just tossed it onto a metal tray and grabbed a fistful of rock salt and cayenne. Kill it, Julian said. Burn the outside so he can't see the dirt. Over-season it till his tongue goes numb. If he gets sick, well, his stomach probably can't handle rich food anyway. Marco nodded and threw the contaminated meat onto the hottest part of the grill. Flames shot up, licking at the dirty fat. The smell of char and heavy spice filled the air, covering up what they'd just done. Julian stood there watching the smoke rise, arms crossed. He wasn't just serving a meal. He was teaching a lesson, putting the garbage man in his place. He had no idea that the smoke rising from that grill was the beginning of his own end. Zora stood behind the server station, hidden by the heavy velvet curtain that separated her from the dining room's warm glow. She was polishing a crystal glass, but her eyes were glued to the narrow window in the kitchen doors. Through the glass, she watched it happen like a silent nightmare. The head chef, a guy whose ego took up half the building, was laughing so hard his whole body shook. He wasn't laughing at a joke. He was laughing at the food. Zora couldn't believe what she was seeing. He picked the tomahawk ribeye up off the floor, the same greasy floor where dishwashers tracked in mud and bleach, and tossed it onto the grill like it was nothing. The flames shot up, searing the dirt right into the meat. Zora's stomach twisted. She set the glass down. Her hands were shaking. She looked at the clipboard hanging by the register. Her name was near the bottom of the schedule, scrawled in Sharpie with a red circle around it. Next to it, probation, underlined twice. She closed her eyes and did the math. Rent was 3 days late. Her student loan bill was sitting unopened on the kitchen counter at home. She needed this shift, needed the tips. More than anything, she needed to stay off Julian's radar. He was out there right now, prowling the floor like a predator. If she said something, she was done. Simple as that. She glanced out into the dining room. Table 4 sat like an island in the middle of all that wealth. The guy in the army jacket sat there with his back straight, ignoring the couple at the next booth who kept snickering and whispering. He didn't look like the vagrant Julian made him out to be. He just looked tired, like a man who wanted a hot meal and had paid good money for it. He was carefully arranging his silverware, treating the table with more respect than any of the rich regulars ever did. A bell rang from the kitchen, sharp and demanding. Through the window, she saw the chef plate the contaminated steak, drowning it in chimichurri and truffle butter to cover up the grime. He wiped the edge of the plate, grinning at Julian, who nodded his approval. Zora looked back at the man in the beanie. He was just a guy, a human being about to be humiliated, maybe even poisoned, for the entertainment of people with too much money and too little heart. The fear of eviction sat like ice in her chest. But anger was rising faster, hotter. She couldn't do it. She couldn't be part of this. Zora reached into her apron pocket. Her fingers brushed past her wine key and found a cheap pen. She grabbed a clean white napkin from the stack. Heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe, she pressed the pen to the fabric. The ink bled slightly into the weave as she scribbled the warning, her handwriting shaky with adrenaline. She folded the napkin tight, hiding the message inside, and took a deep breath. Then she stepped out from the shadows. Service. The chef's voice cracked through the kitchen like a gunshot. Zora shoved the folded napkin deep into her palm, hiding the movement by adjusting her apron, and hurried to the pass. The tomahawk sat under the heat lamps looking perfect. To anyone else, it was $70 of prime beef glistening with herb butter and charred just right. To Zora, knowing it had just been dragged across a filthy floor, it looked like poison. Julian was already waiting, leaning against the counter, checking his watch. He didn't look at her, just looked through her, tapping his shiny shoe on the rubber mat. Table 4, he snapped, nodding toward the dining room. Drop it and go. Don't chat him up. If he asks for anything else, ketchup, steak sauce, water, tell him we're out. I want him eating, paying, and leaving. In that order. Got it, Zora said, keeping her voice flat even though her throat felt tight. She reached for the heavy silver tray. As her fingers wrapped around the cold metal handle, she slipped the folded napkin underneath, pressing it flat against the underside of the rim where nobody could see it. It was clumsy, desperate. If Julian caught even a glimpse of white paper where it shouldn't be, she'd be dragged out by security before she made it to the carpet. But Julian had already turned away to yell at a busboy over a smudged wine glass. Zora lifted the tray to her shoulder. Heavy. The smell of roasted garlic and seared meat hit her, making her stomach turn with the weight of what she knew. She pushed through the swinging doors and stepped into the dining room. The shift was brutal. The kitchen was all clanging metal and heat. The dining room was quiet jazz and cold air. As she started the long walk toward the center of the room, the atmosphere changed. People didn't stop talking, but they got quieter. Heads turned. Eyes followed her. They weren't looking at her, though. They were looking at where she was headed. She felt like she was walking a tightrope with no net. Every step on the plush carpet felt slow, like the room was trying to drag her back. To her left, the woman in the pearls smirked and whispered something to her husband. They were waiting for the show, waiting to watch the beggar eat dirt. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Julian move. He'd repositioned himself near the host's stand, half hidden behind a potted plant, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He was watching her every move, waiting for her to slip up, waiting for her to show the vagrant even a hint of kindness, so he could fire her on the spot. Zora kept her face blank, professional, emotionless. But her heart was hammering so hard against her ribs she thought it might shake the tray. She tightened her grip, feeling the sharp corner of the hidden note digging into her skin. Just keep walking, she told herself. Don't look at Julian. Look at the table. Caleb was still sitting there, hands folded on the white tablecloth, staring at the empty space in front of him. He looked calm, patient, completely unaware he was the punchline to a cruel joke. As Zora closed the last few feet, the tension in her chest pulled tighter. She wasn't just delivering dinner anymore. She was delivering a warning. The heavy silver tray felt like it weighed 100 pounds as Zora stepped out of the kitchen and back into the warm glow of the dining room. Every eye in the place seemed to follow her. The rich diners stopped their quiet conversations to watch the show, the vagrant about to get his meal. From the corner of her eye, she saw Julian leaning against the bar, arms crossed, that nasty smirk on his face. He was waiting for it, waiting for the moment the guy at table 4 took a bite of the contaminated meat he'd ordered the chef to ruin. Zora's heart was pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. Under the tray, tucked tight in her palm, was the folded napkin, her secret and her ticket out the door if Julian saw it. She knew if he caught even a hint of what she was doing, she'd be fired before the end of the shift. But when she looked at Caleb, sitting there with that quiet dignity despite the dirty jacket, she knew she couldn't hand him a plate of poison. She reached the table. The smell of seared beef and way too much salt rose up in a cloud that felt like a lie. She lowered the tray, the clink of the plate against the tablecloth sounding too loud in the sudden quiet. "Your tomahawk steak, sir," she said, keeping her voice steady even though her knees were shaking. "Enjoy." As she adjusted the steak knife, she leaned in, her shoulder blocking Julian's view. In one quick, smooth move, she pressed the folded napkin into Caleb's hand, her fingers brushing his for just a second. She didn't look away. She held his gaze, her eyes begging him to understand what she couldn't say out loud. Caleb's dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, everything stopped. He felt the paper. His rough fingers closed around it without thinking. Zora pulled back, her face blank and professional again, and walked away without looking back. Behind her, Caleb sat frozen. He didn't pick up his fork. Instead, he dropped his hand below the table and unfolded the small piece of paper. "Do not eat." Kitchen tampered with it. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. Caleb went completely still. The air in his lungs turned cold as the words hit him. This wasn't just about a bad steak. This was calculated cruelty from his own employees, targeting a man they thought had no power to fight back. He looked down at the glistening meat, then up at the manager still smirking from the shadows. The rot he'd come to find wasn't just a rumor. It was sitting right in front of him on a white plate. Are you on Zora's side for risking it all? Like and subscribe if you believe character matters more than a suit. The silence at table 4 was thick enough to choke on. Caleb stared down at the tomahawk steak, then back at the desperate scrawl on the napkin in his hand. His jaw clenched so hard the muscles jumped under his dirt-smudged skin. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and shoved the heavy plate toward the center of the table hard enough to make the silverware rattle. From his spot by the bar, Julian's smirk disappeared. This wasn't going how he'd planned. He'd expected the vagrant to dig in and eat the tainted meat, giving the kitchen crew a good laugh when he got sick later. Instead, the guy sat there like royalty in rags, eyes dark and accusing. Panicking that his sabotage might come to light, Julian straightened his tie and strode across the floor, heels clicking loud against the marble. "Is there a problem, sir?" Julian asked, voice dripping with fake concern that didn't touch his cold eyes. "That's a $300 cut of Wagyu. Most people in your situation would call that a gift." "I'm not eating this," Caleb said, voice low and dangerous enough to make the woman at the next table gasp and clutch her pearls. Julian's eyes shot to Zora, standing a few feet away with her hands clasped tight over her apron. He saw how pale she was, the way her eyes kept darting to the plate. He didn't need her to confess. He knew she'd interfered. In a split second, his strategy changed from mockery to damage control. If he was going to save the restaurant's reputation, and his own ass, he needed to get rid of the witnesses and the evidence. "I see what's happening here," Julian announced loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. He turned a vicious glare on Zora. "Zora, I told you to serve this gentleman professionally. Instead, I find him insulted and refusing his meal. What did you say to him? What lies did you whisper?" "I didn't lie, Julian," Zora said, voice shaking but her chin up in one last act of defiance. "Don't talk back to me," Julian snapped, stepping into her space to tower over her. "You've been on probation for weeks, and now you've chased off a paying customer with your incompetence and your big mouth. You're fired, Zora. Right now. Hand over your server key and get out." He spun back to Caleb, plastering on a fake apologetic look aimed more at the wealthy diners watching than at the guy in the beanie. "And as for you, I think this little experiment is over. You've caused enough of a scene in a 5-star establishment. Keep your dirty money and your attitude. Get out, both of you, before I have security throw you into the street." Caleb didn't move. He just looked up at Julian, a cold smile spreading slowly across his face. The look of a predator who'd finally seen enough wrought to justify burning the whole place down. Caleb didn't flinch when the manager's spit hit the tablecloth. He just reached up and pulled off the frayed beanie, smoothing back his dark hair. He grabbed a wet wipe from the dispenser and wiped the tire grease off his jaw, revealing sharp, unmistakable features. The face of a man who didn't just belong in this room. He owned it. When he stood up, the hunched, tired posture was gone. In its place was a man with cold, commanding presence, shoulders squared with the kind of authority that made Julian take an involuntary step back. The sneer on Julian's face started to crack, replaced by confusion. "You want us to get out, Julian?" Caleb's voice wasn't rough anymore. It was sharp, clear, the tone of a man used to being obeyed in boardrooms from London to Tokyo. He reached into a hidden compartment in his boot and pulled out a slim black phone and a corporate ID card. He slammed the ID down on the table. Bold letters caught the chandelier light. Caleb Rowan, CEO, Rowan Hospitality. Julian is about to find out exactly who he messed with. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a billionaire's revenge. A sharp gasp rippled through the dining room. The woman with the pearls nearly dropped her wine glass. "It's him," someone whispered from a nearby booth. "That's Caleb Rowan. He was on the cover of Forbes last month." Julian's face went white, sickly gray. His mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. "I've spent the last hour recording the rot in this building," Caleb said, eyes like stone. "I saw how you treated a man you thought had nothing. I heard the order you gave the kitchen to serve food off the floor. You didn't just fail a customer, Julian. You failed everything this company stands for." Caleb's voice dropped lower, colder. "You're fired. Leave your keys on the host's stand and be out of this building in 60 seconds, or my security team, already at the front door, will drag you out." Julian fled, stumbled over his own feet, and disappeared toward the exit. Caleb turned to Zora, still frozen in shock, eyes wide as she realized the man she'd risked everything to save was actually her boss. He reached out and gently took the server key from her trembling hand. "Zora, integrity is doing the right thing when you think no one's watching," he said, his expression softening for the first time all night. You're the only person in this room with real class. Julian's gone. You're the new general manager of the Obsidian. Clean this place up. The elite diners sat in stunned silence as Caleb handed Zora the roll of cash he'd pulled out earlier. Consider this your signing bonus. Then he turned and walked out through the golden doors with the quiet confidence of a king who'd just reclaimed his throne. Caleb just made Zora the new boss of the Obsidian. Comment deserved if you think she earned that promotion. We love you all.